welcome to video number 3 for the Canon EOS 60D. In this video we're probably going to do two parts, so we'll say part 1 for this one. We're going to be looking at the flash control menu. Okay, so we'll go into that here. We're still on the first shooting menu and we'll go into flash control by pressing set. And first option that we see is flash firing enabled or disabled. That's either say the camera can fire a flash or it can't. Fairly self-explanatory there. Press menu to go back. Now, built-in flash function setting. You can see below here external flash functions and external flash custom functions. And you can also clear any external flash custom function settings you set. Now, we can't go into those yet until I mount a speedlight on top of the camera, which we will do in part 2. So we're just working with the pop-up flash that we see here at the moment. Built-in flash. Now, the pop-up flash on the 60D, as all pop-up flashes are, in the wrong damn place, but it's the only place really where they can put them. Now, the 60D has something over some of the older EOS cameras. I know other cameras do this as well, but it can control Canon speedlights off camera wirelessly through its slave functions. Now, it is line of sight limited. I know Nikon cameras have done this for a while. Other cameras in the Canon range can now do this as well. The Canon 600D, 650D, as well as the 7D also as well. Okay, so excuse the noise there. Flash mode, manual flash. The one thing I do like about the 60D, one, it has a pop-up flash. Sometimes it can come in handy. I do rarely use it, but sometimes it can come in handy, if only to trigger off-camera lights which have optical slaves maybe. The one nice thing about this is you can manually dial the flash in, so you can either have the flash in manual mode or ETTL through the lens metering. So we'll have a look at ETTL first, and we have shutter sync settings. Okay, we can either do first curtain sync, where the flash will happen at the beginning of the exposure, or second curtain sync, where the flash will happen at the end of the exposure, or just towards the end of the exposure. Okay, different uses for those. We're going to have a tutorial on first curtain, second curtain sync coming up on Untitled, so we'll go into it on those in more detail. But it can be the difference of showing motion in an image and not showing motion where someone just looks frozen static. Second curtain sync is nice when you're dealing with ambient light. You can let the ambient exposure build up, your subject will blur a little bit, and at the end of the exposure the flash will fire and it will look like they're running, riding, cycling, whatever they're doing, really fast. Okay, now in ETTL mode, the camera and the flash determine the exposure. It sends out a pre-flash, which is then calculated based on the camera settings that you're using. That's your aperture value, ISO as well, and the working distance, and it gives you a flash exposure which should be correct. ETTL is not foolproof. It can and it will get it wrong at times, but if you don't know about flash exposure, then it's a simple system, fairly simple system to use. We do have on Utiphoto tutorials about dealing with off-camera manual flash. I'll stick some annotations up so you can get over to those, or an annotation for the playlist at least. Okay, should you want to watch those. Now, first curtain, I'll leave that set. Exposure compensation. Basically, we can tell the flash, okay, whatever exposure you determine, I want you to give me 1 stop more, 2 stops more, or 3 stops more. Or, of course, minus 1 stop, 2 stop, or 3 stops, as well as the third stop increments in between. So we can say, you're getting it wrong, so whatever value you give me a bit more, give me a bit less. Okay, the ETTL metering can either be on evaluative, where it takes account for the whole scene in front of it, or an average, where it picks out an average part of the scene, typically towards the middle, and averages out some of the values on the edges to give you your exposure. It's not quite center weighted, it is a little bit different, although we don't have center weighted options on the built-in flash. Okay, now wireless function here can either be disabled. Remember, this is dealing with Canon speedlights where it will trigger them off camera using the slaves. I will show that at a later date. Okay, we can have it disabled via the off-camera flash and the inbuilt flash together, and what we can see here is it gives us channel options, so we can set these slaves to channels 1, 2, 3 or 4, we can dial in flash exposure compensation, or we can dial in a ratio between the off-camera light and the built-in flash should you want to use both as part of your exposure for the image that you are making. And the other options as well is just to fire the external flash only. So basically the inbuilt flash sends out a command flash saying the inbuilt flash sends out a command flash to the external flash saying fire. It does not then contribute to the exposure. Okay, firing group, we can fire either all groups or groups A and B. On certain cameras like this Canon 7D you also get a group C as well. Okay, we can dial in flash exposure compensation for the external flash. Remember it's set for TTL at the moment, so again telling that flash to give me a little bit more, a little bit less. Okay, and we'll also then have a look at manual. Now manual flash mode, flash output, again you can see the little pop-up flash there. We can tell it to give us quarter power, half power, full power, all the way down to 1/128th of power. So depending on what you want to do. Quick tip for you, if you do have an external speed light with no wireless triggers and you want to trigger it, you can use this function on the 60D to fire it. It doesn't have to be a Canon branded flash as long as it's got an optical slave. You can get it to trigger an off-camera light as long as that off-camera light's optical slave can see the burst of light that you get from this. And this is where you might want to dial that power down so it doesn't contribute to your exposure but will still fire that off-camera flash for you. Okay, we have the options of first curtain, second curtain again, and we also have the wireless functions of just the external light. Okay, we can choose the channel, firing group, and the flash output. Remember, we are choosing what output for that flash to choose. This will only work with Canon Speedlights, by the way. Okay, we'll go back. Oops, we won't go back. We can also choose to use the external flash plus the inbuilt flash as part of the exposure. Okay, and we can assign those in different groups. We can do all groups, groups A and B ratioed with the inbuilt flash, and we can choose the individual power of the inbuilt flash and the external flash based on our requirements for the exposure we are trying to make. Now it is quite complicated without showing you that system in use, so what we will do in a later video, I'll show you that being used so we can kind of correlate it together. Majority of these tutorials will be about menu items, but when it comes to something like that I know I have to show you visually, and that will come at a later date. Okay, so we'll go back. Now what we'll do in part 2 for this video is we'll have a look at the external flash function settings. This way is where you would mount an external flash. Again, it has to be a Canon branded flash, such as a Canon 430EX, EX2, 580EX, EX2, or even some of the later generation 600 series EX flashes as well. So we'll see what options we have in that menu in the next part of this video.